What's up, everyone? My name is Dreas, and I'd like to welcome you to Año Nuevo State Park on the California coast. It's a pretty windy day here, which is actually perfect for what we're talking about. Today's EcoShare subject is dunes. Today we're going to be covering three topics: how dunes form, what are the challenges facing creatures who live in this ecosystem, and what adaptations do they have to survive here.
The first, and perhaps the most obvious ingredient in a dune ecosystem, is sand. But where does the sand come from? Here on the California coast, a lot of our sand comes from rivers. As water moves downstream, it carries sand with it, and when it gets down to the ocean, it deposits that sand, forming a beach. The next ingredient for making sand dunes is wind. Wind blows the sand around. On the California coast, the wind tends to blow from the west, meaning that the sand is getting pushed up against the shore. The third and final ingredient that goes into a dune ecosystem is plants. Plants have roots which hold the sand together so that it doesn't just go all over the place. Take a look at this video, for example. What do you notice about the relationship between the plants and the shape of the sand? Did you notice that the slope of the sand is steeper in areas that have plants? That is because the plants are stabilizing the sand. Their roots hold the sand together, so instead of blowing away, it forms these individual mounds. In other words, sand dunes. So to review all that, rivers bring sand downstream to the ocean. Wind piles that sand up along the shoreline, and then plants stabilize that sand using their roots. So what is life like for these plants and the other creatures that live here in this ecosystem? Well, life in the sand dunes is a challenge. For one, the sand does not have the nutrients that you would find in soil. The sand is also porous, which means it does not retain water very well. In addition to that, creatures living here have to find a way to survive right next to the ocean. That means putting up with storms, winds, salt spray. And that brings us to the biggest challenge of living in the dune ecosystem: succession. Succession is the natural change of an ecosystem over time. To understand how succession works in a dune ecosystem, let's take a look at this diagram. Consider a stretch of beach where a new load of sand has just been deposited. Eventually, small plants start to settle in this sand. We call these plants pioneer species because they are some of the first species to show up and start living in the sand. Over time, more and more of these pioneer species settle in the sand, and as they do so, their roots begin to hold the sand in place, beginning the formation of sand dunes. As more small plants settle in the sand dunes, eventually the sand is stable enough to support larger plants, which in turn stabilize more sand, creating more sand dunes. But the sand dunes are a dynamic ecosystem where change is constantly taking place. Eventually, a disturbance event such as a large storm will come along, with strong winds and massive waves that will wash away some sections of the sand dune. When this happens, sections of the sand dunes will be left bare, and the whole cycle starts over again, with small plants settling first, leading to the formation of small dunes, which in turn support larger plants, leading to the formation of larger dunes. This cycle is what we call succession, the gradual change of an ecosystem over time.
The dune ecosystem is in a continuous state of succession, where instead of just having one species or one group of species that dominates, it's a patchwork of all sorts of different creatures living together.
The plants you find in a dune ecosystem are specifically adapted for this environment. For example, they have evolved to be able to withstand the salt spray that comes off of the ocean. These plants grow low to the ground, which helps them survive on windy days like today. Without tall growing plants though, there's not much shade, which means that these creatures have had to adapt to an environment with very intense light. Some of the ways that they do this are by having hairs on their leaves, or having leaves with a waxy covering. Both of these strategies protect the plants from the rays of the sun, similar to how we protect ourselves with sunscreen. And plants aren't the only creatures you'll meet in the dunes. You'll also come across many species of birds, like vultures and ravens. And while you won't see them hanging out in the sand dunes, elephant seals are another example of the amazing creatures that you'll get to meet when you check out these coastal ecosystems. This is another group of creatures that I want to mention. This is cryptogamic crust. It's a mix of bacteria and algae, and it grows on the surface of the sand. These creatures stabilize the sand so that when the pioneer plants come along, they have a sturdy substrate to settle in. They're really delicate, so when you visit a dune ecosystem, make sure you stay on the marked trails. If you see someone wandering through the sand dunes, make sure you explain to them that walking around not only damages the cryptogamic crust, but it can damage the shallow root systems that these plants have. Fortunately, many parks have built boardwalks, which allow us to access the dunes while minimizing our impact.
Alright everyone, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's EcoShare and learned a little bit about dunes. I also hope this video got you excited to go explore dunes if you have some in the area where you live, whether that be the coast or the desert. They are a really cool example of how our planet is always changing and how we can be a part of making that change positive if we learn about our environment and make smart decisions. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.